Checking to see now. Do I hear anything else? Nope, I don't.
We don't hear anything.
What about from me? From me?
No.
It never gets old.
Great. You are living so far in the future, you did not even realize it. For example, there is a whole class of drugs called biologics, which are made from living organisms, and they can be composed of sugars or proteins or nucleic acids. These can be made of living entities like cells and tissues of animals or humans or microorganisms. And at some point, the patent for these drugs ends and a more generic version can be sold. But because the biology is more complicated and unique, the quote unquote generic version might be medically as efficient, but is only structurally similar. These are called biosimilars. And they come with a whole host of unique challenges when it comes to antitrust litigation and allegations for when the drug comes out and who gets to sell them. So we thought today we'd explore these analyses around biosimilars and talk about what kind of unique problems we might face and think about them in regard to litigation. Hello and welcome to Of Significance, the podcast that's not just the generic version of Freakonomics. I'm your everyman host, Brent Buckright, here with a data expert who knew about big data before it got big, Dr. Nathan Woods. And it looks like we have another expert whose bio is similar. It's Dr. Steve Bronars. Nathan, Steve, how are you?
Fantastic, Brent. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Brent.
And joining us today is Catia Twal. Catia is an antitrust economist at Edgeworth Economics with an extensive experience on all phases of litigation, performing economic and statistical analyses to evaluate class certification, liability, and damage issues. She also advises attorneys and clients in assessing data for discovery and estimating damages exposure for settlement negotiations. Catia, welcome to the pod.
Thank you. Witnessing that intro live was amazing.
You know, I do the best that I can, and I have a mini heart attack every single time I try. So I tried to set up a little
similar for that.
I tried to set up, to the best of my knowledge, what a biologic is, what a biosimilar is. Did I get anything wrong there? Is there anything that might help the audience understand what these things actually are supposed to be?
Oh, no, that was fantastic. I mean, you pretty much nailed it. They're complex medications manufactured using living systems. They're typically administered as an injection or through an IV infusion. You've probably heard commercials for drugs like Skyrizi, Remicade, Humira. They're used for a variety of conditions. So autoimmune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, they work by stopping inflammation. They're also used for cancer treatment. So they actually help the body's immune system recognize and destroy cancer cells. Also, there's other conditions like insulin products for diabetes, gene therapies, monoclonal antibodies, vaccines like the COVID vaccine, shingles, and blood products.
So I feel like we've had, vaccines for a while, and in a way that kind of feels like a biologic injecting an inert form of the virus into us in order to get our body's immune system responsive to it. Does that count, or how long have biologics and biosimilars been around? How common are these kinds of drugs?
So biologics are not new. I mean, they date back to the 1800s. The first FDA-approved biologic was in the 1980s. That was actually human insulin. So biologics been around for a while, but biosimilars are actually pretty new. So the first biosimilar was introduced in 2015. So even since then, only a fraction of biologic spending actually faces biosimilar competition. So I think currently there's only 20 to 25 branded biologics that actually have biosimilars available of the 200 to 250 biologics on the market.
Would you say that when they used to put leeches on people, would that be a biologic too?
I'm not a medical professional.
What do you mean you used to?
So when it comes to biologics and biosimilars, can you talk us through a little bit about what the antitrust allegations are here and how these kind of compare to a typical case that we might see?
Yeah, sure. So many of the recent litigation around biosimilars actually revolves about the timing of when the biosimilars would have entered the market. So, for example, recent litigation for Humira, which is a branded biologic, centered around patents, um, more specifically the number and validity of the patents, that plaintiffs alleged delayed the entry date of potential biosimilars. So essentially, they're arguing that they paid higher prices for longer than they would have if the biosimilars entered when they believe they should have. So the result of Humira was multiple settlements with multiple biosimilars launching in staggered dates. So in litigation related to biosimilars, questions around class certification, liability, damages requires plaintiffs and defendants to rely on either assumptions or estimate the percent of patients that would switch to a biosimilar following market entry of a biosimilar, stay with the branded, and the prices of both the branded and biosimilar drug. For generics, these markets, this pricing and the switching is pretty widely studied, although courts still debate. There's still debate in the courts on this, but for biologics, it's still pretty new. And there are aspects that we're going to talk about that make applying an average experience inappropriate. So we can't assume that biosimilars will behave like generics, where there's rapid substitution, large price drops, and a large increase in market share for the biosimilar. Economically, biosimilars, they have pretty different experiences.
We've talked to other experts before about, this delay allegation. When I think about what are the considerations there? What is the common defense against a delay issue?
So usually when we think about the defense of a delay issue, it's very much detailed in the patents. There are specific merits experts and patent experts who will argue that certain patents are valid or invalid at a certain time. For the cases, what we focus on largely is the damages piece. And for the damages piece, we really think about what does the but-for world look like? So if the biosimilar had entered at an earlier date, how many people would have switched to the biosimilar? How many people would have stayed with the branded biologic? And then how would the price of the biosimilar be? And how would the price of the branded be? That's important because we're trying to estimate damages in this case. We need to know what would they have paid for the branded and what would they have paid for the biosimilar.
Can I go back a little bit on this just to compare to the more chemical drugs? For those, it's a 20-year patent, right? And you have to go through FDA approval and everything. But is it shorter for the biologics? Is the exclusivity period shorter than the 20 years? Or is it the same?
So for small molecule drugs, so traditional chemical drugs, Hatch-Waxman Act says that it's a 5-year exclusivity period for the first branded drug. And then there's an additional 6 months for the first approved generic. For biologics, it's much longer. So for biologics, it's 12 years of exclusivity for the first branded biologic, and then 1 year for the interchangeable.
So this Hatch-Waxman Act says that the clock starts once it's introduced. So if there's delays in getting approval, that's not when the clock is going on for the more traditional.
So the clock starts
small molecule.
Right, that's correct.
Okay, so it's actually longer for the biologics.
Right, it's longer because short. It's far more complicated to create a biologic. Pfizer actually released that for a small molecule drug, it takes about a year to develop and $1 to $2 million to create. For a biologic, it takes 5 to 9 years and could cost over $100 million to develop. So because of that, there's a longer exclusivity period for manufacturers to recoup all the costs of investing in a new drug.
Okay.
So going back to the kind of the issues that you're thinking about with the damage calculations in the but-for world, so obviously these are different kinds of drugs. I don't have any of them myself, so I'm asking for a friend. But do we expect people to just jump to the biosimilar? These are sophisticated drugs. They're taken for really complicated problems. Maybe it's different from like changing my toothpaste or something.
Right, exactly. So Like you said, clinically, they're highly similar, but they actually compete in a very different way. So let's think about briefly for traditional small molecule drugs, we'd expect a generic to take up 80 to 90% of the prescription volume. For biosimilars, that's absolutely not true across the board. And there's reasons for that. So first, let's think about auto substitution. So if my doctor prescribes a branded small molecule drug to me, I will show up at the pharmacy counter and the pharmacist will automatically switch me to the generic. Not just a standard practice. For biosimilars, that's not the case. So biosimilars have to receive an additional designation from the FDA called interchangeability, and only a minority of approved biosimilars have that interchangeability designation. So we're talking only about 25 of the 90 or so biosimilars that are on the market. And then even if a biosimilar is FDA approved as interchangeable, automatic substitution at the pharmacy is ultimately governed by state laws. So some states say you have to ask the patient and the doctor for approval before switching. Some states just you have to inform the patient, but the patient has the right to refuse. So it's entirely at the state level, and it's not the automatic process that we think about with normal drugs. Also, I mean, like you said, we're talking about really chronic conditions. So different conditions can cause patients and physicians to be more reluctant to switch to biosimilars. For example, if you're taking an oncology drug that's administered in a physician's office, really the provider is the one who's going to be making the decision about the drug. But if you're taking a self-administered product to the pharmacy, you may be more or less likely to switch. Also, new patients may be more likely to be on board with a biosimilar than stable patients. If I am a patient on a stable regimen, I may be a little reluctant to switch to a new drug, even if it's a biosimilar. So switching people's minds is a large part of that.
With a lot of drugs, I know that switching between different drugs or switching from the name brand to the generic, there are lots of concerns about different potential side effects, even if you think that the drug is meant to treat the same thing roughly the same way. For a biologic to a biosimilar, is that consideration greater? Because I know that in order to get approved in the first place to be a biosimilar, you need to have medically the same effect, but I'm curious how far that extends.
Yeah, so because they should be clinically the same, there really shouldn't be too much of a concern with side effects. I'd say because it's, again, a different drug, I think the reluctancy to switch is more of a mental barrier, not so much that you're worried that the side effects are going to be different, but it is a different drug. So,
And the people in the commercials, they seem very happy, which would say, hey,
Always.
you know,
what could go wrong?
Yeah. Yeah. So you got that.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, because these are pretty sophisticated drugs, there's not a big price reduction in the biosimilar, right?
That's true. So, when we think of a normal generic drugs, prices often decline dramatically following multiple generic entrants. I mean, sometimes it reaches a fraction of the branded price. But for biosimilars, they're usually more modest and evolve more strategically. So because we have higher production costs, fewer entrants, the products are differentiated, one of the most important aspects of pricing for biologics and biosimilars is actually rebates and contracting. So what this means is they may compete for specific PBMs instead of reducing prices across the board. So I know PBMs is a whole nother can of worms, but briefly,
PBMs is a can of worms we've opened a few times. And I think
Let's
So
open it again.
very wormy.
Yeah.
Wormy.
So PBMs create formularies. Formularies are a list of drugs that outline which drugs are covered and the cost sharing associated with them. So if you are on a high tier, you have the smallest out-of-pocket costs as a patient. If you're on a lower tier, you have the largest out-of-pocket costs as a patient. So PBMs are able to influence people to, purchase one drug over another based on where they place the drug on the formulary tier. So drug manufacturers will compete for formulary placement. So rather than, a biosimilar enters the market, I'm going to drop all my prices by 10%. Perhaps I drop my prices for one specific PBM by 30%. and another PBM by 15. So you don't see that rapid decline that we often see. Most of that pricing competition actually does happen through these rebates and contracting and formulary placements.
One of the questions that I have is, whenever these drugs are being approved, whether it's, more traditional or the biologic, you have to show some efficacy. But certain things may work differently for different people. Some work better than others. And I'm just wondering, you say if things are going well with the biologic, is there any evidence that, things could be even better because the biosimilar it may not be exactly the same thing and you may respond even better to it? Or is that really not an issue that comes up? Because, whatever the condition is, there are different patented drugs to treat the same thing. And clearly, since they each have their own patent, they're not chemically the same thing, but they're
Right.
trying to deal with the same illness. And so you may try different approaches. And I'm just wondering if that's an issue with the biosimilars, that you might get a better result, not like worried that the result would necessarily go in the wrong direction.
So it's funny you bring that up because it's almost like this industry. There's actually a whole word for that, and that's called bio better. Essentially, when we're thinking about this, we not only have competition from brands and competition from biosimilars, we also have competition for other branded biologics, and we would call that a bio better. So think of it as a next generation of an existing biologic drug. So we said there's a bunch of conditions that biologics treat, but there is a lot of overlap, meaning there's a lot of biologics that treat the same conditions, and they are competing very intensely with each other for the same patients. So if I'm the manufacturer of a branded biologic and I have a biosimilar enter the market, I'm not only worried about that biosimilar, I'm worried for the next branded drug that's going to enter and their biosimilars. So it's a very competition is pretty intense there, because it's even more intense than when you think about small molecule drugs, because there's so few and the conditions are so chronic that and they're very expensive, so you're competing pretty intensely.
How big does a molecule need to be before it's no longer small?
I can tell you, metformin, tiny.
For the chemistry majors in the audience.
Steve has a 1 foot long molecule on his desk right now.
I think it's pretty large.
Also, I think there's for scale of just the price point of these, HHS reported that biologic medications account for 51% of total drug spending in the US, but only 5% of prescriptions.
Oh, that's a big gap.
When I am watching the business news on the business network, and they're talking about the pharmaceutical industry, like one of the big issues they have is how much of their revenue is coming from a particular drug, and it could be a biologic or maybe it's not, and how the stock is going to do, how the company is going to do in terms of its ability to finance future investment depends on, what happens when the competition for that really increases. And even if the price doesn't go down, their market share could go way down. Probably the price is going to cut as well. So, it's got to be a big issue for them that it's not as diversified.
Yeah, if you read the shareholder reports or the 10Ks or whatever quarterly reports, they have whole sections on competition for their drugs. So they'll talk about this biosimilar is anticipated to enter in the next year. There's this other brand of biologics that's preparing to enter. They think a lot about competition from other products.
I mean, when I'm switching between medications from the branded to the generic, I personally am happy to have the lower, out-of-pocket cost, but I do feel like I'm getting something worse, even if it's chemically the same. I just kind of wonder if maybe biosimilars might benefit from a rebrand, because the similar makes it sound like it's not as good as a biologic, like by innovation or something. Like it needs a new name to make people feel like if I'm already going to be paying a very large amount of money for this, regardless of whether or not it's the biologic or the biosimilar, Shouldn't I feel like I'm paying for that premium?
I mean, that's part of the reason why they use names instead of the I don't know what to call it, the scientific name. So when you think about a generic, Tylenol, Advil, ibuprofen, acetaminophen, the branded has that recognizable name, and the generic has the chemical names that nobody can remember or pronounce. For biologics, often the biosimilar has a name just like the branded biologic. They're doing that, partially because it helps, with their marketing and building of their brands.
Yeah, discount Metafen definitely sounded rather. So thinking about class certification, what are the kinds of things that you guys have to think about in these cases?
So for biologics specifically, a lot of the things we consider are what was available to a given patient at a given time. So there's an argument to be made that if a patient has their health insurance managed by a PBM who only has maybe one biologic and one specific biosimilar, their switching rate may be lower than a patient who has a health plan that's managed by a PBM with a whole array of biosimilars. Sometimes people get into a report and people will say, okay, 30% of patients would have switched to the biosimilar in year one. And we'll often dig beneath the surface and say, okay, maybe that's, applying that average is not entirely appropriate given these sets of facts. Also, if you're thinking about a really simple example is if you have an insurance where you pay a flat $10 copay, no matter the price of the drug, you do not have the same amount of damages as somebody who pays a co-insurance, which pays, say, 20% of the drug price. So that's in class certification. A lot of it is understanding the different aspects at play and how individual plaintiffs are experiencing the, alleged bad action and what's available to them or the prices that they would pay.
So with these really expensive drugs, I, I could kind of imagine a world where if I've got the biologic and the biosimilars coming out, that the biosimilar presumably would be somewhat cheaper in price. I don't know how big of a gap that is, but perhaps a pharmaceutical company would be interested in reducing the price of their biologic. Is there a possibility for people to switch back and do models take into account that reality?
So is it possible for someone to switch to a biosimilar and switch
Or is
back?
this just not a thing that happens?
That's not often something we consider that someone is going to switch back to the biologic, but it is very much true that if a price of a biosimilar is not, as large, the incentives to switch may be less, right? So switching is inherently related to not only pricing competition, but as we talked about earlier, is what's available to them. So, these health plans and PBMs have a huge influence on biosimilar uptake.
The market share for name brand drugs when there are generics, it's not like zero. There's still
Right.
it
It's not
probably
zero.
kind of declines, and then it just sort of stabilizes at some point. I think another way, like, does it ever start rebounding? People are going like, I'm going to move away from that generic acetaminophen and go back to the name brands or uh, obviously for all the other kind of drugs out there that have both generics and that, it would seem like it's pretty monotonically declining over time. More and more people feel more and more comfortable using the generic as opposed to then, for some reason, market wide, it's switching back and going there. I guess it depends though, like you're saying, on copays and like
Mm-hmm.
if I'm not really paying anything other than the first however many dollars, why not get the brand name if there's any possible benefit from that? But
Right.
I would guess that would be the typical situation is that this keeps your share is going to keep trending down if you're the name brand.
Right. Your
Is that
trend.
kind of what you see?
So I'd say in general, it probably will trend down. The only, I would say, asterisk to that is branded biologics continue to compete pretty intensely. So when traditional drugs, when the generic enters, they kind of usually cut their marketing. They don't spend a whole lot on trying to convince PBMs to put them on a favorable place on their formulary. All that kind of subsides pretty quickly. Just that mostly it's because the generic price is just so low. Um, and the generic entry happens pretty rapidly, one after the other, that they kind of just move on to the next medication. For biologics, that's not the case. This marketing will continue for biologics, branded biologics, even after many biosimilars enter the market. They are still competing pretty heavily. So it's not, they just rapidly decline and come down, and it may not even decline for a while. I mean, you could see a couple of years, maybe longer, where the branded biologic is still holding on to that market share. They are competing very, very hard, and because of the reasons talked about, like automatic substitution and convincing providers and patients to switch, they can really retain that market share for quite some time.
Have there been studies showing the quantitative effect of this? I forgot what you called it, but when the pharmacist can say, "Oh, that's the equivalent," is that what was
Right, the automatic substitution.
that automatic substitution has there been empirical studies that show that that is definitely something of value? If you're the biosimilar, if you can get that, you're going to perform better than if you don't. Are you
Yeah,
aware of
if
that?
you
If you're
get,
not, that's fine.
um,
Yeah.
I don't think there's empirical studies, but
Okay.
I know from, looking at, when we've looked at data, getting that interchangeable designation does increase your ability to switch patients over.
Got it. Interchangeable.
I have a question that, Advil, the delicious candy coating,
Yeah.
it's so much better than all the other ibuprofens. And what's stopping other people from putting that candy coating on it? Because I'd be way more likely to buy the generic if it had the candy coating.
Well, I candy coat all my injectables and it doesn't seem to make a difference.
I have no idea.
These are really expensive drugs. It's not easy for people to switch to them. There aren't as much discounting that goes on, but the fact that a PBM has the ability to put them into their formularies, they've got more incentive to keep them in particular formularies for longer. As I understand it, they also have the ability to have specific contracts about particular biosimilars. Can you tell me a little bit about that market and the potential effects that has on antitrust litigation?
So there's a new trend happening in biologics. It's pretty
The teens are doing it.
It's pretty interesting. So it's called biosimilar private labels. So essentially they are versions of biologic drugs that are co-produced and marketed under the names of a PBM rather than a drug manufacturer. So the big three PBMs that we often think about are CVS Caremark, Optum, and Express Scripts. All three of them have their own private labels now. It kind of reshapes the way we think about private labels because PBMs can shift their formularies to favor their own private label biosimilars. So we can see sometimes these private labels are on the preferred status that's shared with others. But alternatively, sometimes they can actually exclude or move down the original branded biologics and other competing independent biosimilars. So, the argument there is by controlling the distribution and the pricing, PBMs can offer lower prices that ultimately decrease costs to payers. But some critics have been arguing that it creates a conflict if PBMs are incentivized to push their own labels over other clinically equivalent options. So it'll be interesting to see how this plays out. This is super new. And as we talked about earlier, I mean, the whole space of biosimilars are new. So there are many more major biosimilars that are expected to face competition over the next decade. So we're going to see that this next phase of competition is probably going to depend far less on FDA approvals and more on payer incentives and how they're competing with PBMs for placement, contracting prices, and negotiating these rebates. So it's not so much as whether biosimilars work clinically, because we know that they do, but how other ways of competition unfolds for these drugs.
It seems to me that one of the points that you're making here about the allegations in a pay for delay type scheme are that biosimilars, because they are so prohibitively expensive and because they require education for the doctors and for the patients, and people have to, there's a lot that goes into getting people to actually make that switch, that those are not quite comparable to the brand chemical drug versus the generic. And I'm curious if there's understanding within the industry that the price of these things is going to go down dramatically over the next 10 years. If we're going to, or if it seems like for the next, chunk of time, we're going to be fighting over a very different market.
I cannot anticipate overall prices for biologics decreasing over time. It is just very expensive to create. The process is very delicate. It's hard to copy, it's hard to manufacture, it's hard to develop. Unless those facts change, I don't see that entire biologics system decreasing in price over time. I think that's going to remain.
When I think of private labels, I think of when I'm in the Trader Joe's and going like, who really made this? And because it also says Trader Joe's, and I don't know if there's like some Trader Joe's food place there. But anyway, the for the private labels, it's an interesting thing because I wasn't even that aware of PBMs. And so when I hear private labels and PBMs, like, hey, our PBM has our own private label for this drug. I'm going like, who does that matter to? It seems like a very different kind of thing because like, oh yeah, I'm going to go with that because my PBM, which I think most people, if you ask them what's a PBM, they would go like, I don't know. They have their own private label. You want that drug because they put their name on it. And I'm like, I don't even know what their name is.
The answer is it matters to everyone. You just don't know it.
It must matter to somebody, but I don't think the end consumer really is that aware of that, right? It's someone else along the way must care about it. But when I think of private label, I just think of the end consumer and like,
yes, it's a PBM private label, and that's a name you cannot know.
Whereas when I'm in the Trader Joe's and they have some new product, they put their name on it. So,
so was there a question in there, Steve, or was there more like a statement about Trader Joe's?
I think Steve's saying when he spends 99 cents on pasta instead of $1.99, that he cares about. But when he spends $20,000 on a dose instead of $21,000, that get out of here.
That's what I'm wondering. Like, what's that? What is the name of? I was just making the observation that I'm not sure who that PBM's name is appealing to. As like, hey, use this version of it because of our name recognition, brand recognition, whatever you would typically think you're getting with the private label designation. So clearly it matters to somebody.
Catia, your colleague, Tram Nguyen, actually paid for us to delay having you on. Catia, thank you very much for talking to us about all of this stuff. And we hope that as this industry and the litigation develops, you'll come back and let us know what's happening.
Thank you. And thanks for listening.
Well, that's been this episode of Significance. This episode's been brought to you by Edgeworth Economics, a leader in economic consulting, and with the help of our producers, Kimberly Krewald, Ryan Deal, and Brian McLamara of Brand Ready Media, with music by Armwell Lang. Thanks for listening, StatPack, and always remember to check your assumptions.